Thanks very much, Bob. I very much appreciate your introduction. That's very kind. I've had the great pleasure of having a number of connections to Bob over the years, obviously during his role as deputy minister and in a whole range of other ways. It was always fun to talk about his forestry days at the University of Toronto and just all of the aspects that he's played within the forestry sector over quite a remarkable career. So thank you very much, Bob. And thank you very much to Keith and the team for the invitation to speak to you this morning. It's a great pleasure to be able to talk about a topic that I give a fair amount of consideration to, and I certainly thank Keith for providing some background thoughts and giving me some license to be, I hope, a bit provocative about the issues that we face within science. Of course, I would certainly like to apologize for not being in the room in person. I need to be in Washington, D.C. this week, and we'll see how this goes. I had the tremendous pleasure of representing the University of Alberta in northern Iraq in December. So that means that I've got an Iraqi stamp in my passport. So I'm sure this is my first trip to the U.S. After that event. Had a glorious time in the autonomous region of Kurdistan in northern Iraq, where the university and our faculty is looking at how we can collaborate with a number of Kurdish universities. But we'll see how that goes. So really appreciate the ability to be able to speak to you by video. And of course, at the end, I will make myself available and look forward to the kind of conversation that we can have with respect to some of the ideas around the topic at hand. Now, that topic is what Keith originally gave me was talking about the efficacy of science. And I think he's given me a bit of dispensation, or perhaps I've taken it, to start the idea more around the aspect of how can we be sure that science is making a difference? And we're going to test that from a few angles. And what I would encourage is for each of you to think where you fit on the spectrum of activity that I'm going to describe. Now, to introduce the subject, I'm going to do it in a rather odd way. I'm going to bring forward an image from probably my favorite National Film Board piece of work, something called Cosmic Zoom. It's an animated film. I know this will seem awkward, but put your hands up if you've actually seen Cosmic Zoom sometime right from your childhood on. Good. So you'll have a sense of where I'm going, and for the rest of you, I'm going to describe this 8-minute and 14-second animated film, and already I've given away one of the interesting elements, because the film, and it's done by Eva Satz, 1968, by the National Film Board of Canada. The National Film Board has been very kind about its intellectual property. It is made available. These are all open source images. And I would very much like to credit the National Film Board for the work that I'm going to show you. The opening is a boy, an actual film of a boy and his dog rowing a boat, it turns out, on the Ottawa River. But then there's a rather interesting transformation, because the next image that it morphs into is an animated image of the boy and the dog rowing in a boat on the Ottawa River. And then the next spectacular piece happens where the camera starts to zoom out. And the progression starts as if the camera is pulling up. Now you see Parliament Hill and where the rivers actually converge in Ottawa. And the progression continues under this amazing soundtrack. And I encourage all of you to have a look at this movie. It's very much available on the National Film Board YouTube site. Pulls back from North America, pulls back from the Earth, through the solar system, through a series of constellations to really the edge of the galaxy. We know that the boy and his dog are still there, but we've had this tremendous pulling out. And then the camera starts to zoom back in. It zooms all the way back in through the solar system onto Earth, right up to the next image where once again, the boy and his dog are rowing their boat. So if you see where this might be going, the next sequence of images starts going in the opposite direction. Starts to zoom in on the boy and on the boy's hand, because it turns out that there's something happening on the boy's hand, and it's the visit of a mosquito. And as the perspective zooms in, it moves all the way through platelets to red blood cells to the proteins and the heme groups within that particular blood cell, right down to the electron of an atom that the film starts to concentrate on. And then once again, it pulls all the way back out. So when I started to think about science, and the perspective of whether or not science is effective, whether or not it's actually making a difference, cosmic zoom seemed like the perfect place to start from, because clearly all of us in this room have a different perspective. My own perspective comes from serving as a research scientist. I worked in sub-Saharan Africa and in Canada. I've worked as a research funder, as a CEO of one of the Alberta Innovates corporations. Clearly now, with the pleasure of being Dean of the Faculty of Agricultural, Life and Environmental Sciences here at the U of A, 1,600 undergraduates, 500 plus graduate students, 120 faculty members, a faculty that averages somewhere around $45 million a year of external research funding. So I guess that's some of the perspective that I bring when I start thinking about these top 10 ways to make sure that science does actually make a difference. And again, I would encourage you to think about where you fit when I start naming some of these ways. And clearly, it's a bit of an homage to David Letterman. I still miss some aspect of the approaches that he took over all those years in late night television. So let's talk a little bit about these top 10 ways. I'd say the first way that we need to make sure, or things that we need to do so that science will have an impact, that it will make a difference, is to have a sense about the outcomes that we want. And I'm just going to pause for a moment. And when you think about your work, even when we think about the topic of this workshop, of this meeting, what are those big outcomes that we are trying to produce? Now, I'm going to make a wild guess here, but maybe people started to think about healthy forests or some other of those high-level outcomes that we would anticipate. That makes sense. But what are the metrics around that? What are the things that what does it mean as far as biodiversity? What does it mean about protection? What does it mean about forests as carbon sinks, or forests as opportunities for economic diversification, or for growing the economy of a country? All of those things come into play. And again, sometimes in science, I think only of myself. I was right away thinking about getting to a research proposal and identifying a problem statement and starting to think about all the issues that we could lay out in the effort to source funding to do the work that we needed to do. But it's not bad to pull back, not unlike the cosmic zoom approach, and just start to challenge ourselves on even what we think those big outcomes are. And sometimes the cliches, the tropes are not necessarily the ones that perhaps create the most value for what it is that we're actually considering, what we're thinking about. So that's the first one, thinking about those big outcomes. The next step, I would argue, is to understand the elements of the big picture. If I think about everything that is going on in forestry right now and issues that are going to have an influence on not only those outcomes, but the way that we are going to express the work that we do, and you are much more qualified to think about that list of what is going to be involved. But I can think it's everything from the issues of climate change to the handling of carbon credits to what it means around biodiversity. We have a softwood lumber agreement that is obviously going into what appear to be darker days. What does that mean? What does it mean around the ownership of companies that we're involved with? What are governments trying to accomplish? Just to again gain that perspective, to just take a moment, that thoughtful, intentional moment, to start to consider all of the different elements that are going to be important as we start even to consider how we are going to apply the method of science, the activity of science to make things work. So understanding that context, creating that big picture, and I think a lot of us are great at doing this. We can synthesize what's going on politically or in economic circles or in government, or the pressures coming from and support coming from non-governmental organizations and others, in addition to everything that's going on within the scientific community. So I'd advocate around understanding those elements of the big picture as well. And of course, we need to ask the right questions. Now, it's easy when we're committed to a discipline or to a geography or some of the things that we probably think we can't change. That challenge to ask those right questions becomes critical to where it is that we want to go. Obviously, the history of science is about asking questions that make sense, that allow us to use the methodologies that we know to try to get to answers. As with all of these things, it's great to be able to ask those right questions. I think this is an obvious one, but you could probably tell that I'm setting up this question for number 4, which talks about getting the right partners in the room to ask those questions. Because I've been in rooms with plant breeders, I've been in rooms with people that have just one particular outcome in mind, but it seems like the diversity of the people in the room to help us to frame the questions that are in play, to understand the issues, maybe to bring ideas or interests into play that we may now have no perspective of. And I apologize for an example in a different sector, but over the last few weeks, I've been involved in some of the thinking around putting proposals together for the supercluster funding that the federal government has identified in its both previous and now the most recent budget. $950 million. Dominic Barton and his colleagues on the Economic Advisory Council that the Prime Minister and the Finance Minister have put together here in Canada have done some thinking about what sorts of industries show the greatest opportunity for growth. And the first paper that they have developed is around the agri-food sector in Canada. And they talk about all the ways that the agri-food sector can develop. So this will not surprise you. Several of us, industry leads and others, are coming together to talk about how we might be able to put together a plan, a proposal for a piece of that $950 million for the development of an agri-food sector, to actually power the agri-food sector beyond the 33, 35 billion dollars. It's actually probably now quoted almost 45 billion, because the Barton report says that we can actually increase exports by $30 billion to $75 billion. And interestingly, one of the companies that has come forward, and I don't think I'm betraying any secrets here, is a data company, a global data company, one that has remarkable history and legacy, but has also shown just tremendous leadership in an array of sectors around big data. But this particular company has no real links to the agri-food sector. It's certainly not one of the companies that would immediately come to mind when we would think about agriculture or agri-food within Canada or globally, and yet it's one of these global leaders. So I guess I'm also encouraging you to push a little bit beyond the usual suspects when you do try to get those partners into the room, when you do start to have these dialogues. it isn't a bad thing maybe to just try to stretch that net a little bit. You never know what you are going to come up with. And I think particularly in this century, in the decade that we're in now, those boundary areas become the most interesting ones. And I think it's a challenge to us to figure out how we can learn, bring together people that are going to help us to get some of these questions in mind. And then, of course, moving on to the most obvious piece of just framing that particular question, of making sure that we're answering the issues that we want to deal with, to make sure that we're engaged in actually putting the resources that are available to us to work with those resources in the most effective way possible. And I guess the challenge here, again, this is obvious. You people have lived this life over your entire career. This is nothing that's new to you. But I guess I would cite a group like Genome Canada. Genome Canada has been this powerhouse of investing in genomics research across Canada, these hundreds of millions of dollars. But one of the things that they insist on is what they would call a GELS component. And I know a number of you are funded by Genome Canada, so this will not be new to you. But they talk about a GELS component. So GELS in their mind talks about genomics, but it also talks about incorporating the ethical, the environmental, the economic, and the S is the social aspects of the work that they do. So can you imagine? This is science that began with Craig Ventnor and the sequencing of the human genome. This hardcore, both software and hardware, to look at DNA sequences, to do some of these things that I think some might be tempted to believe are very technical, that really have none of these other aspects in mind. But Genome Canada very wisely has put a constituent of their funding around these issues of ethics, of environment, of economy, of incorporating the social aspects, the social science aspects of the work that they do. And I think that it has stood Canada in very good stead. So framing that problem, fair enough. But is it wide enough? That's the question that I think that we need to continue to ask ourselves. Of course, we want those boundaries, but we then want to be able to drill down in. It's a fine line on how we organize ourselves. So we're framing the question, we're thinking about pulling things together. Not only do we need the right partners and the right insights for framing the question of getting to that stage, but then to create these interdisciplinary teams. Again, you all know this, and I know from some of the presentations that have already been done on day one, it's clear that you are working across disciplines, across campuses, so across institutions. It's again a cliche, but the complexity of problems demands that we have a much broader range of expertise from those single parameter questions that many of us asked early in our careers, where you thought that you could just tweak one particular aspect and then we would be able to get all of this information based on just that single tweak. We now have not only tools to deal more effectively in these interdisciplinary, sometimes people categorize this as transdisciplinary. I think that's where we need to be, to get those right people into the room, to make it attractive for them to do the work that we need to do, because that broad spectrum of activity is going to be a much more beneficial way to address the issue that we're talking about, certainly to get to the outcomes where we started this dialogue, but also to make sure that we can get the valuable kind of information that's going to be important. So creating those interdisciplinary teams, and again, many of you are shining examples of this. The next component is to do excellent science. Now, I think I might have said that the way that I started to think about this would be the things that I worry about, and it's probably true of the progression of items that I've outlined. I worry about how good we are at all of those things. This is the one thing I am not worried about. We have tremendous people in Alberta, across Canada, the partners that we work with. They have remarkable capabilities when it comes to science. Here's what I worry about. You may have seen that the Naylor report came out a couple of weeks ago. David Naylor, former president of the University of Toronto, again was asked by the federal minister of science to look at how we're doing as a country as far as investing in science. And I encourage you to look to the report. There are a range of intriguing things. There are just a couple of aspects that worry me. The report specifically talks about it being much more difficult for young researchers to access the type of funding that the federal government is starting to work with. It identifies all the disconnects, how hard it is for young researchers to start to build their careers because of the way the funding mechanisms have evolved, and that's a concern. And then there is the concern that the report identifies around just that blue sky research, that opportunity to actually go out there and ask questions that perhaps would be unexpected or unanticipated. So, do we have the capacity to do excellent science? Absolutely. The Naylor report talks about some inconsistencies in how we fund science at the federal level, and certainly here also at the provincial level. There are a number of aspects to how funding can be done in the areas that you work in. We've had a consolidation of the Alberta Innovate system. We're yet to see how priorities are going to be set within that organization. And I can't make any guesses as to where they are going, but it seems as if there's a suggestion around an emphasis on building companies and making sure that those companies can use the new knowledge and the new technology to develop growing, vibrant companies. That sounds great, but we also have to have that pipeline full of the kind of work that you do to make sure that we do have resilient systems, that we do have those healthy forests that I opened up with earlier in the talk. So we could do great science, but there are a few little kickers. There are a few threads there that do make me a bit concerned. And of course, I think I've started to hint at this idea, but the idea of not just creating the data, but using our expertise, using our abilities to craft that into a body of knowledge, to start to pull all of these things together. It always amazed me as a graduate student in a very diverse set of, with a diverse set of graduate students around me. After all of our work was done, we still ended up with spreadsheets of data. It was still data that we had to work on, to parse, to try to bring into some semblance of order, so that we could do that progression of and again, you've all heard this cliche of data, information, knowledge, wisdom. Sometimes I think we have to work a little harder, and we see it when we're trying to convince people. We'll state a statistic, or we'll state a change number around a delta that has happened in something that we've measured. But people need more than that, and I'll have a bit more to say about how we actually ensure that we're not only creating the data, the numbers, the information, but how we actually create some understanding from the work that we do. So let's just check in. We've talked about 8 things. What are you good at? What have you done so far in your career? What are the things that maybe you haven't necessarily spent as much time on? We're all pressed for the time to do the work that we do. So a little bit of a check-in. And the last one, as far as in this sequence, is talking about that next generation of researchers. If we want to have resilience in our industries, in the work that Canada does, in making sure that we continue to be a productive nation. And yes, I have an enlightened self-interest in this, but training that next generation, again, many of you are tremendous examples of this. It's been fantastic to see all of the graduate students that are involved here at the workshop. But to have that in the back of our minds, that we really are trying to pass on the possibility of science and of science's role in our society by making sure that we do have that next generation that's coming along. So I've talked about 9 aspects. There's one that is obviously missing, or at least I would think that it's obvious. And I'm just going to do an awkward pause for about 10 seconds. What do you think I've missed? Good answer. Anybody else? All right, I'll stop with the dramatic Academy Award winning performance. I'd say that the one thing that binds all of these 9 elements, and I think that I could vouch for each one of these in a very linear way, is the area of communication. I think I would put that as the 10th in this progression, but really it becomes the center of everything that we do. Almost every aspect of this that I've been suggesting requires some sort of connectivity, of reaching out within our own disciplines, of reaching out to the people that are of influence, the people that perhaps can make policy, and the kinds of things where we do want to achieve change, the kinds of areas where science can make a difference. But I think it's important for me just to identify that communication obviously is just not that one-way street. And I regret that I didn't put the bullet here of listening. When I put understand, my intention was to show that we also have to be active listeners, that we have to reach out and understand the issues that other people are facing, the issues that organizations, corporations, all others that they're bringing to the table as well. This isn't just about us telling our story. Sometimes we get caught up in that. And then I've used some other verbs there to show how we do have to turn that information into something that has additional value to the various partners that we may want to engage, to involve. And the last bullet, I think, could be a little bit controversial. I would say that we also have a responsibility to advocate. Clearly, there's a values-based issue, and I would acknowledge the work of Lee Foote and a number of other authors that produced a very interesting paper that Keith McLean can give you the reference, where they make a very articulate case for having a responsibility, particularly as public funded researchers that have command of the detail of an area, that understand many of the aspects and elements, that we do provide a source of advocacy for things that the evidence that we have produced, the synthesis that we have pulled together actually makes sense. And obviously that advocacy probably comes out, the first thing that comes to mind is around policy development, but I would hope that there would be other things that we could also be considering as well. So I've talked very much around the areas of where we can start to do things, where we can do things well, and I guess I would just finish up with some thinking with respect to how do we know if science makes a difference? I would argue that it's these kind of big outcomes that society will appreciate, where we will actually earn the resources that come to us to do the work of science, that citizens are aware, that support research. I mean, think about the new opportunities in citizen science and others. This isn't just about making people aware, but it's actually getting them involved in some of the work that we do. The decision makers have new options for policy, clearly something that MPB work has been critical in over the years. Practice change, very much the same sorts of things. The information that you're generating is creating new ways in which our forestry companies, the way governments and others think about this issue across Western Canada and beyond. Clearly that this research creates the opportunity for asking new questions, and some of that will need to attract additional funding. So actually seeding the work of the next generation of researchers that is coming along, attracting people in, that idea of career choices, I think very much that's an element or an impact of successful science. And then, as described, that some of those, the work that we do leads to even new and additional and interesting questions that we need to solve. So I'm going to finish off with the same particular image that we might have started out with. Where are you when it comes to this circle of the things that we need to do to make sure that science does have an impact? I'm sure that you have tremendous expertise and excellence in some of the aspects, some of the elements that I've described. Others maybe something to work on for the future as well. So I'm keen to hear about your thoughts, whether we're getting things right, whether we're getting it all right, and maybe others are the ones that criticize science that they don't understand. Clearly, there might be some issues there about how it is that we even address the criticisms that come to us within the scientific community. So once again, thank you to Keith, thank you to FRI, and it's been a great pleasure to be able to present to you this morning, and I look forward to having some engagement around the Q&A. Thanks very much.